so we get to leave behind. I was recently talking to somebody who actually talked about, the only God that they knew was the God of their parents, because everything, and they kept talking to me about the God of their parents. They kept talking to me about how they, every time they would go to church, they would go with their parents, or they would go do this, and their parents this, and their parents that. And I said to this person once, I just stopped him and I said, so what's your image of God? And he just stopped for a minute. He said, well, my image of God is my parents' image of God. And I said, well, quite honestly, from what you've told me, your parents' image of God is a vengeful, nasty God who just is out to get you all the time. And no wonder you're struggling to find the blessing in God if that's the image that you've got. I think sometimes, and I know in 12-step meetings they do this sometimes, I think sometimes you just need to write God a pink slip. The old image of God, and just write that pink slip and say, that's not the God I believe in anymore. And that I get to be an adult, and I get to grow up, and I get to take a mature image of God. An image of God that is beyond perhaps what I've learned or what I've been taught, and it's an image of God that I have through my experience. Because the image of God that we really should have is the image that we have journeyed with God. And through difficult times and through blessed times. And that's the image of God that we get. And then we get to be teachers. Now, you see what the letter to the Hebrews is telling us is that we move from just being immature to mature. We get to take accountability and responsibility for our relationship with God. And that in that accountability and in that responsibility, we then get to become teachers. We get to tell others about our experience of God. And the real experience of God. Not just the cookie jar image of God, but the real image of God. And I think that's one of the things that we try to share authentically in this place every time we come together for worship, is that we try to think about and speak about that authentic experience of God. The experience that so many of us have had and so many of us are journeying with. Because the wonderful thing about this is that the image of God continues to change and continues to evolve and continues to live because we have a living faith. It's not a dead faith. It's not a faith that ended at the end of the New Testament. It's a faith that continues to live and breathe through each and every one of us. And so the more we talk about that image, the more we get to see the fullness of that image. The more we get to understand how God can be with us and dwell through us. But that takes responsibility. I think it's easy to live through somebody else's image of God. That's an easy thing to do. What's more difficult is to have that grown-up image of God. The God that is real, the God who's authentic, and the God who is living through us, living out of us, and living into the world. That's what we get to do if we truly embrace our spiritual journey and if we truly embrace the God that loves us. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty grown up to me. It sounds pretty mature to me. And it sounds like that real God is the God then that compels us out into the world to teach others, to show others, to enable others to find God for themselves. But a God that is real. Not the image of God that as long as you've got a smile on your face, God's there, and when you haven't, God isn't. But a God who lives through our depression. A God who's with us when we're not sure where we're going to sleep tonight. A God who's with us when you go to work tomorrow or yesterday or whenever it was and you get told that you haven't got a job anymore. A God who's with us when you watch your bank account get lower and lower and lower because the bills keep getting higher and higher and higher. A God who's with us when we're ill. A God who's with us when someone who's transgender gets beaten up and we don't understand the violence. A God who's with us. Well, you can fill in the blanks. Because we've all had those experiences. And the mature for us is to say that God hasn't abandoned us. but that God is with us and is asking us, how do we change the world so that these situations don't happen again and again and again? You know, I said at the 9 o'clock service, I really struggle sometimes with the Christian church today. You know, I'm not post-Christian. I've decided that I'm reclaiming my Christianity, and I'm reclaiming it in a good way. There are some things about the Christian church I don't like and will continue not to like, but that doesn't mean that I'm not a Christian, because a Christian means I'm a follower of Jesus, not a follower of the church. And that's one of the things I'm reclaiming in my own spirituality. But I want to tell you, there are some things I struggle with. I struggle with the fact that the church will bless warships and armies as they go off to kill people, but they won't bless relationships that are based on love. I struggle with that kind of theology. I struggle with it. I struggle with a church that will continue to oppress women and say that we've all been created in the image of God. I struggle with a church that denounces people of color and say that they are subservient or different from those who are white. I struggle with a church that says that gay people don't have gifts that they bring to the family of God, and that LGBT people are not a part of it. I struggle with a church that continues to oppress and to marginalize people. I struggle. But that doesn't mean I'm not a Christian. And it doesn't mean that you and I, through our authentic experience of God as mature Christians, as people who know different, shouldn't stand up for the God that Jesus knew. Shouldn't experience the God that Jesus knew. And so I want to really think about our church. And to think about how we can move from the milk of the gospel to the solids of the gospel. How do we move from that place? And that doesn't mean we all should move together, because we're all on this continuum that, you know, transfers, and probably we go backwards and forwards. You know, sometimes in the most stress of life, it's easy to just go back to that old image of God, because it's perhaps a comforting place, and perhaps we do move backwards and forwards. But how do we become teachers? How do we, you know, don't get criticized like the Hebrew people that were criticized that day? How can we transform our experience into being teachers in the world? Well, I think we do it just by living it. By living it. By living out our spirituality every moment of the day. By living it out. And not just living it out when we think people are watching. You know, that's easy. You know? But how do we live it out so that it becomes such a habit, such a part of who we are, such a part of our culture, that it just is the way we are? I think it takes practice. And all spirituality takes practice. We can't just show up on a Sunday morning and think it's just going to happen, although I do believe in the miracle of God that will touch us at certain moments in our lives. But I think that we are called to practice.